Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about a topic which I have talked about in the past, but I think it's relevant to bring up again because of the situation that I'm in. So a lot of people have their own gripes with War Thunder, whether it be repair costs, whether it be research, whether it be map design, whether it be anything, to be quite honest. A lot of people seem to be focusing on repair costs and also map design right now, and I think there are definitely issues to go into. But I thought in this video I would explore the largest issue I personally have, which keeps me away from using newer vehicles, especially from the rank 5 and rank 6 area, whether it be ground vehicles or air vehicles. And I'm going to use the example, as you see in this video, as a test case. So the Chieftain Mark III is a vehicle that I've had unlocked for a while now, and it's pretty much a vehicle that I haven't really touched. And the reason for this is because I know that the stock grind of this machine is going to be really annoying. I already stock ground the Conqueror Mark II, and just as a preface to this, I never buy modifications on machines, because I feel like if I ever do a review of something and I've bought through some of the modifications, it takes away from the average player's experiences in what's going on. So therefore, from that point of view, I don't buy modifications, so I can understand exactly how much time it's going to take a person to be able to do it. Now, I do allow myself to have premium because I feel it is a necessity at rank 5 and especially at rank 6 tanks. But the Chieftain is another vehicle that I know I'm going to have to grind 20 to 50 matches in order to get the 3 components which even make this thing serviceable when you're fighting others, and that is parts, FPE, and of course one of the other tier 1 modifications, which is either tracks or horizontal, depending on where you sit. For me, tracks is what it is on the Chieftain, and why that is important, because you need 2 tier 1 modifications before you can get that FPE, which is tier 2. So before I'm even on the same level as some of my opponents, I'm at a massive disadvantage and I have to play 20 to 50 games, depending on which vehicle. It's the same reason why I researched the MBT-70 at the start of when it came out, which I believe was update 1.75. I touched it for about 10 games and then realized it was going to take me years to get parts, and there was nothing I could do about it. I could gold it, but I'm not going to, because that would be unfair and it would create a biased view on my part on trying to review a vehicle. So instead, I just leave them. It's the same issue I have with rank 5 jets. Rank 5 jets, I mean, it's got slightly better over time, especially using them in ground realistic, where you can at least have a bit more of a fair fight. But if we're talking about the 8.0s and then the 9.0s, there is a stark difference between a stock rank 5 jet and a fully spaded rank 5 jet. Just like there is a stark difference between a stock Chieftain and a fully upgraded Chieftain. Now, there are some vehicles out there which you can get away with having an okay stock grind. For me personally, the 2 that spring to mind are the Leopard 1 and the Conqueror Mark II. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with the Leopard 1 because of the Sabo round and also the fact that the gun is inaccurate. But as a player who has mainly gone through British tanks at rank 4 and rank 5, I can tell you I'm kind of used to it by now. And one of the key things that a lot of vehicles lose when they don't have the modifications unlocked is the speed and acceleration of a vehicle. So if you're able to get them straight off the bat and not have the engine and transmission upgrades really changing that much, or at least adding on to something that's already good, then you can sit yourself in a position which means that you can at least be comparable to the stuff which is fully upgraded, where with the Chieftain, you don't have this because you're incredibly slow. So because of that, the Leopard 1 was a much more pleasant grind than something like a Chieftain or an MBT-70, which has the stock ATGM and not the stock APFS DS. The Conqueror is another machine that I had quite a fun time spading, and the reason for this, even though it took me about 30 games to get parts and FPE once again, is because it fits my playstyle. So does the Chieftain in a way. Basically sit at the back somewhere, make sure that you have a decent line of sight on an enemy, snipe from miles away. If your gun misses, it misses. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But basically stay out of the line of fire. as best that you can and be able to shoot without the enemy shooting you back, and play incredibly supportive, incredibly defensive. So the Conqueror, it has a little bit of speed behind it when it's stock. It has a really nice gun on it. I understand people want to see the Sabo do more damage, and I completely agree with that. But the Chieftain does not have the speed. The turret armor is good, but once again, if you don't have parts, your gun breach gets knocked out, and then you get charged by about 50 Leopard A1A1s, and obviously this isn't very good for you. So what happens is, as you go up in BRs, it is much harder to be able to get the modifications that you require, because it's going to take you more matches, so therefore people aren't going to play those top tiers. The only people who are going to play are the people who have golded those modifications and then maybe ground out the rest while they've got them. And you can understand from a business point of view why Gaijin do this. It's so people don't just have to research the vehicle, but they also have to research the parts with gold to make it a lot less harsh on the person for that 20 to 50 matches that they're going to have to struggle in getting the major modifications that you require. And for me, I completely understand that. I just wish that it was slightly changed, because right now it is massively in favor of the people who gold stuff instead of the people who just want to research the vehicle. And there are fixes that I will go through with this, but just understand that the biggest issue I have in game, if anybody asks me what it is the stock grind of vehicles compared to their fully modified selves, because they are two completely different machines. You can take many different machines. The M47 is probably the best example. You have a stock AP shell, which is pretty bad. You have a gun which is very wobbly, you don't have a lot of speed, and you don't have a lot of armor. Once you're fully upgraded, you have access to a very good heat FS round. Your gun is a hell of a lot more stable, so you can fire on the move at some points. You have the engine power. The armor doesn't get better, but it doesn't need to, because the other characteristics make up for this. But if you're in a stock place, you're screwed in the M47, and I feel the same way when I was using the Challenger, because I was basically, the Chieftain, where I was basically just stuck sitting on cap points waiting for the enemy to push me, because if I moved out of the cap points, well, guess what? I'd get shot and I wouldn't be able to move, or my gun would be knocked out and I'd have to go back to the cap point anyway, showing that I have to play this thing ridiculously defensively instead of in a way that would be much more proactive for my team. So let's go through a few fixes for this. Now, the first one is a very obvious one, just reduce the RP requirements for the modifications. This is something that we saw with researched vehicles when it came to rank 5 and rank 4, before they added in rank 6 vehicles for ground forces, and they also reduced some in the air as well, such as the F3D just recently got reduced. But that is something which is a very easy fix, and to be honest, there's not really a lot to talk about. That's kind of like just saying, well, everything should be cheaper. It's not a great fix, but it is a fix. The next one is just changing the effectiveness of modifications. So there are definitely specific modifications in the game right now, depending on what tank you're using, which are incredibly overpowered if you have them compared to if you don't. So this is in the form of parts, of course, FPE, and also ammunition. So let's once again talk about the Leopard 1, or the M47. But the Leopard 1, since I think more people will be familiar with that, or at least that's, you know, the idea that I get. The Leopard 1 with its Sabo shell is completely different compared to its Heat FS shell. Its Heat FS shell pens a hell of a lot, it is able to do a hell of a lot more damage than the Sabo, and you can set it up so it's much easier to hit with once you have the rangefinder, just because you can loop shots over stuff instead of having to fire in a straight line with the Sabo. Now, a lot of people will say the Sabo is much more accurate at range, but by the time you've got Heat FS, you have that adjustment of fire, so generally it doesn't really matter that much when it comes to the accuracy over range. The only thing that matters now is making sure that you can measure the distance properly. So with the Leopard 1, it is a completely different vehicle when you have the Sabo and when you have the Heat FS. When you have the Sabo, you can shoot the side of something, orange someone, and that's about it. Very similar to a lot of the other British vehicles. When you have the Heat FS, you hit the side and the thing goes pop, or at least you do a lot more modular damage. So in that regard, the ammunition makes a big difference, just like in the Pattern 2. So my thoughts about this is to fix these three little areas. So parts, first of all. Instead of parts just being able to repair a vehicle, it should just decrease the repair time of your vehicle. So let's say if you unlock the parts modification, parts would decrease your repair by 50%. Let's just say something like that, or maybe 20 or 30%. But the main point is it shouldn't be a straight 1 or 0 binary idea where you can repair or you can't repair. It should be a timed thing or a percentage thing, which means that everybody can repair even if they're stock. It is incredibly annoying fighting battles at higher tiers when you are stock or near stock, because once you get hit once, you're pretty much out of the battle, but you can hit an enemy and they can just stare at you, roll back a few, meters, and then they can repair and then get back into the fight. That to me is a massive advantage when we're comparing a stock vehicle to not even necessarily a fully upgraded vehicle, just a vehicle that has parts. So instead of, as I said, having the binary 1 and 0, it would be much better if we had parts decreasing repair time instead. FPE, there are two strains of thought on this one, which seem to be, or at least I've heard for the last few years. People like Orange Doom have brought this up, Slick B, other content creators, and also members of the community as a whole. And the two solutions seems to be, if you unlock FPE, you get that second FPE. So you start off with one FPE, and when you get the modification, you get a secondary one, just like you would get when you actually, get the modification of FPE in the game right now. Or the other line of thought is that you can restock FPE while you're on a cap zone. And I think restocking it is not a terrible idea, actually. Generally, if you are able to survive 2 fires from a vehicle, you are either in a situation where somebody is just setting you on fire over and over again, or you got incredibly lucky. So, so making it so that the modification of FPE is less a necessity and more of an add-on, I think would be the way to go with that, just from that gameplay point of view. So being able to restock it on a capture zone, in my opinion, should be the modification, instead of it being a modification that you have to do just to be able to not die from a fire. Or at least have it so you get 1 FPE and instead of, the 2 from the modifier. I think that would work. The next solution is very simple. So one of the things that is an issue is the fact that you have a few modifications at... actually, no, sorry. Let's go back to the change effectiveness of modifications, because I didn't talk about ammunition. So one thing that you can do with the ammunition one is balance by number. So let's say that if you don't have the Heat FS modification for the Leopard 1, you are still able to take 5 rounds of Heat FS. Once you get the modification, you are able to use as many as you want, or maybe up to 10 or 15, something like that. So it becomes the primary round instead of a secondary round when you use it when you have to. You could do this with stuff like the M47, you could do this with pretty much any vehicle, and it would make it a hell of a lot better to use. There are tons of vehicles out there which need this. T92 would be one of them, STB, the STA series, anything with a 90mm, to be honest. And making it so the modification doesn't just give you flat out a different type of ammunition, and instead gives you an increased amount of that ammunition, would promote a hell of a lot of better play from players, because they would learn how to conserve specific amounts of ammunition. And also on top of this, it would make the stock grind so much easier, and limit the effectiveness of modifications to much more performance orientated. So the engine, the transmission, acceleration, top speed, turning, stuff like that, instead of the core mechanics which every machine needs to be combat effective. But let's go on to the next fix. So the next fix is making each modification which you see as primary a lower tier modification. So what do I mean by this? Right now, parts is a tier 1 modification. You can unlock it straight away. Well, not straight away, but you can start researching it straight away once you are able to get a vehicle out. The next thing that you have to do is either get a horizontal drive or a track. And when it comes to airplanes, you have, for jets, you have the active boosters and the engine as a second tier upgrades. The first tier upgrades are generally offensive belts, or they're, something else. Now, generally the engine upgrade is the one that makes the massive difference. The belts does help on some planes, but I think the engine is what people are going for, depending on what plane they're talking, or what jet they're talking about. So, when we look at that, why not make stuff like FPE and the engine upgrades from jets a tier 1 modification, so you can research them straight out of the bat, instead of having to put them behind another wall, which you have to research, and you have to research a modification which won't be as useful and therefore take you more time. As I said, the range from about 20 to 50 games, depending on what rank you're playing, to be able to get these modifications. I think just putting the most necessary modifications at tier 1, making it easier for players to be able to get them, is the way to go when we look at stuff like this. So make parts in FPE tier 1, in jets make an engine upgrade tier 1, and I think that would work perfectly. The other more abstract fix to this whole idea is to add more mechanics which are unlocked without mods. So, in the recent times of the last year, we've had a few mechanics added which are not dependent on modifications. One of them is scouting. Another one is the radar for AA. Now with scouting, one of the nice things about it is that it promotes a different playstyle of playing the game, instead of just being a straight one-on-one, mashup and all of that. You can play the game in a different way. You can play the game much more sneakily, much more supportive of your team, and you're able to set yourself up in a situation where you can do well in a game and you don't have to kill anyone. Even though they've diminished the rewards of it, it's still something that is viable in this day and age in War Thunder. Now, what is nice about it is it makes light tanks grinds a lot easier, because there is a separate mechanic that you can use, which isn't just a straight up brawl on brawl. And if you're in a straight up brawl on brawl, a stock vehicle is always going to do worse than a vehicle which is not stock, which is either got the major modifications or is fully upgraded. So adding more mechanics to each set of machine, which makes this easier, which isn't unlocked by modifications, would just make the grind nicer for each machine. One of the not easiest things, but one of the most enjoyable things I've been doing over the last few patches or so is just playing a bunch of light tanks I've never played before and unlocking the modifications for them. And most of them are rank 4. You look at the Americans, the Japanese, the Soviet ones, and the reason for this is because of that one mechanic. It means that I don't have to fight in a specific way, which is dependent on the modifications I have for my tank or vehicle or jet or whatever it is. So it would be nice just to see some thoughts on this. And what I'm going to do is I will do videos in the future discussing different mechanics that each set of plane or tank could get, which would supplement the idea of being able to gain modifications through them, through teamwork, supporting fires, assists, and all this stuff. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the same situation is going to grow, and I understand the argument about those 20 to 50 games there so you gain experience in the vehicle, and to be able to understand how it plays after that. But my counter-argument to that is the majority of vehicles that we have in-game, their stock selves are nothing like how they play fully upgraded. So even when we look at something like that, the argument is not strong, in my opinion. It may be strong to a few others, but to me personally, it is not. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.